I'm Grainne, compulsive eater. Sorry, here comes a parrot. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day from the Gray Sheet. I turn those meals over to a qualified Gray Sheet food sponsor. I don't eat no matter what. I eat what I've committed no matter what. And my abstinence is the most important thing in my life. And my abstinence date is 9/16/94. And I was when Carla asked me, I felt like I had just qualified. And I know that I have qualified a couple of times in January already. And I just qualified on Tuesday, and I was thinking, well, that was in Europe, so that was okay. Most of the people here probably weren't there. But I look around the room and I think, oh, these poor people, they have to listen to me again, because I know you've all heard me this month. But then there are people in the room who haven't. And so I was going to talk about the importance of meetings. And then I thought, I need to tell my story, because there are people here, I think, who haven't heard my story. And so I'm going to meld the two. So I was thinking about this part of the big book where it says on page 159, seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed, that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women happy in their release and constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the main object was to provide a time and a place where new people might bring their problems. I love that part of the book, because a lot of people will say in AA that they don't mention meetings in the book. And that's where they say, this is what we did. We had a meeting one night a week for people interested in a spiritual way of life and for newcomers. And it really underscores for me that meetings are where we carry the message to the newcomer. And that's how I found the message, the Gray Sheet message. I was going to when I joined Gray Sheet in 1993, we were part of Overeaters Anonymous. We hadn't yet formed a separate 12-step fellowship. So I was going to OA meetings, and I was in my last OA meeting because it just wasn't working. And it was those 2 years in OA from age 28 to 30 were the worst years of my life with regards to food. And I always think of it as if, for the first 28 years of my life, I thought I had a weight problem, and I fought it every day. And I thought about it 24/7. But then when I got the information in OA that I had an addiction, it was as if the disease, like I don't like the idea of my disease as a separate entity, but it was sort of felt like that, like my disease started to fight back harder than ever. It was as if I don't know how, but it felt like I was circling the drain hole faster and faster and faster in those 2 years. And, in the 28 years prior to that, my disease was mostly obsession. So I was constantly thinking about my weight and what I wanted to eat, but I wasn't going to eat, but maybe I would eat. And why did I eat it? And I shouldn't have eaten it, and I won't eat it tomorrow. And it was just this constant restricting and restraining. And I never actually did a formal diet. I never lost any weight in all the years I was obsessing about my weight. I was not one of those people that went up and down the scale. But when I started to actually try to treat the addiction in OA, that's when and so in those 28 years, I was obsessing about it all the time, and I was grazing most of the time. Like, I never had the concept of meals. I didn't eat meals. I just ate. And by the end of the day, I'd eaten so much that it would have been ludicrous to have a meal. So I just didn't have meals. I just ate. I just tried not to eat all day long, but then I would eat. So, you know, when other people would be saying, let's go to lunch, I'd be thinking, no, I'm not going to have lunch. I've been eating all morning. I shouldn't eat. So I wouldn't have lunch, but then I would just keep eating. And then people would say, let's have dinner. Or, you know, everybody would be going home from work to dinner. And I would be thinking, no, 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 I'm not going to eat. And then I would go home and eat, but it wouldn't be a meal. It would just be eating all the time. So when I was in OA and I was trying to do 3 meals a day and nothing in between and no sugar, I started binging. I started eating like not to the extent that I hear people describe it in these rooms, but you know, 2 round Italian things over the course of a Friday night, and buying bags of healthy sweet snacks from the health food store and eating them while driving home from an OA meeting and getting so upset at myself, throwing them out the window and then doing, you know, of the car as I drove home. And I had never done that kind of thing before. So it just felt more and more painful. And so that day that I went to my last OA meeting, I just really had concluded this isn't going to work. Like there's just no hope. I tried everything on my own. And then I tried 2 years of this program, and I tried it as rigorously as I possibly could. I did everything they told me to do 10 times, you know, to 10th degree, and I got no effing relief at all. It just got worse and worse. And yet I went to that meeting, and it was that miraculous meeting where I found the gray sheet message, where a gray sheeter came and had the gray sheet glow. And let me read you what it says in the big book about that. I mean, the big book is not gray sheet, but here is what it says. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortunes and understood his. Impressed by those who visited him at the hospital, he capitulated entirely when later, in an upper room of this house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. The expression on the faces of the women, that indefinable something in the eyes of the men, the stimulating and electrical atmosphere of the place, conspired to let him know here was haven at last. The very practical approach to his problems, the absence of intolerance of any kind, the informality, the genuine democracy, the uncanny understanding which these people had was irresistible. That's what I found when I found my first gray sheeter, was all of that, like that indefinable something in her eyes, that electricity that attracted me. And then when we started having gray sheet meetings, even when it was just the 2 of us, there was more hope in that meeting than I'd ever seen before. It was just indefinable. It was just, gray sheet was so clear. You know, she was so clear about what gray sheet was and wasn't. And she immediately connected me with other gray sheeters. So even though it was only the 2 of us in that town, I went to New York, I went to Cambridge, I went to Ann Arbor, I went to Chicago to see other gray sheeters, and I found what the big book describes. These people who'd found a solution, who were living free of the obsession, who had the hope that they would have, if they didn't have it today, they'd have it soon, a normal sized body, and the absence of what we did with food. And, you know, sometimes I look around the rooms of gray sheet these days, and I wonder where all the old timers are. Now, maybe I'm in the wrong rooms. Maybe I'm in the wrong meetings. But for me, it's critical to be here, to pass on. If that woman hadn't come to that meeting, if those people hadn't been in those other gray sheet meetings that I went to, I wouldn't have gotten what the big book describes. And they did for me what the big book describes those early AAs did for the newcomers. They showed up every week, same time, same place, to say, here's the solution. If you come here on a Tuesday night in St. Margaret's Hospital, in the staff lunchroom, you'll find the solution. And if you come to the Senecal Retreat Center on Saturday morning in Chicago, you'll find the solution. And what a gift. Like, and not only that, but when everybody tells their story, which I always say, I think qualifications are so powerful, is to hear, you know, that person had it just as badly as I do, and now they're free. That identification is so powerful. So that day when that GreySheeter was there, I was so attracted to what she had to offer. I don't know. I'm so grateful. I don't know why I was willing that day. I don't know why I was able to say, oh my God, it looks impossible, but I think I'm going to do it anyway. Well, I do, because she was doing it. Because she was doing it. She said she ate 3 meals a day, nothing in between, committed. And then she showed me the gray sheet, and I thought, nobody can survive on that. But she did. So she just told me what she did. She had 3 years of abstinence. And if she could do it, then I suppose I could do it. So I tried it. And like I've said a million times, she sat down, explained the gray sheet to me, and then she had me commit my first 3 meals. And I instantly felt the 50 pounds, the extra 50 pounds I've been carrying around my whole life, lifted off of me miraculously. Metaphorically, I lost all the weight right then. It felt like I'd lost the burden of the universe that I'd been carrying around my whole life when I committed my food to her at that table in that room in Michigan. I gave it over. I just gave it over. I was willing to do it. And I knew that she had something that she could give me, and it could solve my problem. And it was bloody hard. I always say that. It was really hard those first few days, weeks, months. I made so many mistakes. I was terrified of calling her. I felt like I was burdening her, like I was going to wear the poor woman out with questions and mistakes that I had made. I was terrified that she was going to tell me I had done it wrong and that I was broken and could never do it. And I wanted to eat a lot of the time in those early days. I wanted to eat, and I didn't think it was enough. Like, I finished my meal and I'd heard the phrase, the tragedy of 4 ounces, and I knew exactly what it meant. Like, I finished my meal and I would just sit there looking at the table and the empty dishes and bowls and think, oh my God, how am I going to get through to the next meal? But somehow I did. And she kept me really busy, like phone calls and letters. And this was a long, long time ago, 1993. I was writing letters to people in Europe and people around the United States. And we were trying to get that little meeting off the ground. So I always had some kind of an assignment to carry the message. We were on a campus in Michigan, and so I was always putting up bulletin signs, flyers around campus about the meeting. So I would do that every day. And she just had me doing a lot of stuff. And I know now a lot of it was just to fill the hours between the meals. But eventually, there was some point around 6 months in where I suddenly realized that I wasn't thinking about food anymore, that I wasn't thinking about the next meal, that I wasn't thinking, oh my God, I wish I could have more, that I hadn't had a craving and I didn't know when it had stopped, but it was gone. My head was quiet. The obsession was gone. Well, the obsession was gone long before the cravings, I think. So, yeah, and so going to all those groups around the country, I I felt like I'd come home. I felt like I'd found my tribe. I felt like I had found my the people who were going to show me how to live this life that I never got the manual to. You know, nobody ever told me how to get along with other people, how to have relationships and not screw them up all the time. Thanks, Danielle. And so, like, seeing those people in those meetings, some of them were crazier than me, some of them were crazy in different ways than I was, but I could see that they had some kind of there was a guide, there was a guidebook, which I soon found out was the big book. And one of the first things that my sponsor, she had me looking for an AWOL. As soon as I had 90 days, I was sponsoring, I had to lead the meeting, and I had to find an AWOL. And so the first AWOL I joined was in Chicago, and I would drive down to Chicago for an AWOL meeting. And we studied the steps and worked them in a group together. And we didn't finish them because the leader moved away. And so I finished them with my AA sponsor. Yeah, I had a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from compulsive eating. I'm not the same person I used to be. And I continue to change. So in the last, that's the other thing I love about this program, is that I've continued to change and I've never been bored. I've never felt like, okay, now it's 15 years of abstinence. I've done the steps 5 times. I'm done. Like, I'm just going to cruise on to the end right here. Nothing's going to change. Everything's going to be the same. That isn't my experience at all. There's constantly new things that I'm realizing and discovering about how to live life better. So about 3 years ago now, somebody introduced me to the original Oxford group, Quiet Time and Seeking Guidance, that Bill W. and the others used when they first started AA. And so I've been practicing that since 2018. And that is astounding. Like, that has changed my life. I feel like that part in the big book about we will intuitively know how to handle situations. I feel like that intuition, like I'm keyed in to intuition like I never was before. Challenges come along and I just know what the right thing to do is. And it's not necessarily the easy thing or the thing I would have, that would have been my first choice in the old days, but it's the right thing. And I know it might be hard right now in this instant, but I'm going to feel better at the other side of it than I would have otherwise. I don't have regrets. I don't have remorse and guilt anymore. I used to live in it, steeped in guilt and remorse and regrets for everything I was doing and saying, and not only just the food. And today I don't. And it's all because the food is out of the picture. The food is no longer the problem because I'm abstinent on GreySheet, because I'll go to any lengths for my abstinence. As my sponsor said to me in those early days, it's not a question of if I'll be abstinent, it's a question of how I'll be abstinent. And if the question is not if, then I don't have to think about it. Like, I just have to solve this problem. Like the other day, for some reason, I've been thinking lately about this time that I flew home from Ireland to the United States. And I was having dinner on the plane, and I'd forgotten to weigh the fat out before I got on the plane, and I didn't have a tablespoon with me on the plane. And so I'm halfway across the Atlantic, and I eat my dinner, and all I can think of is, I got to get off this plane and I got to make a call. I got to make a call. I got to make a call. The first thing I did when I got off the plane was make the call. And somebody told me, put a tablespoon on your keychain and this won't happen again. But I knew that, so the problem wasn't going to be like, the situation was not should I, shouldn't I, will I, won't I, why did I? All it was I've got to solve, thanks, Danielle. I've just got to solve this one problem for how to stay abstinent. And I know what the solution is. It's get off this plane as fast as I can and make a phone call. And that leaves so much more brain power for living the rest of my life, because I'm not thinking about whether I'm going to do what it takes to be abstinent. So I feel like this has been a very disjointed and not very narrative structured qualification. But I just have been filled with the joy of being a member of this fellowship and the gratitude that this fellowship exists and the conviction that it's my pleasure to pass it on to the next person coming along, because if anybody was suffering the way I was suffering and they can have the joy that I have today, I want to be a part of that. Thanks.